So let me get started. So my name is Judy, and my last name is pronounced Tweet. It's not the way that it looks. I'm a graduate student in, I work both in atmospheric sciences and in the program on digital and experimental arts, but my master's was just in atmospheric sciences, and I, over the last year and a half, really got interested in science communication using sound arts. So now I work completely in developing new ways of communicating science and doing a lot of work with community groups and general audiences. And so I'm going to be presenting on sonification. And I should say, your last question, Greg, about, is ear sketch something that's useful for people who aren't learning to code but just want to make music? I've been, there's like a gazillion different libraries for generating music computationally, and I haven't used ear sketch yet, but it looks like a great tool for doing that. It's written in native languages that people are already familiar with, so definitely something to check out. I'm going to be sharing a little bit of the code that I use for making sonifications in Python. But first I want to talk a little bit about data sonification and just what that is. So let me move around the windows so I can navigate this a little bit better. So data sonification is this, like, it's a jargony word, but it's just the analogy of visualization. So when you take data, we very often automatically think about mapping data to colors and lines, but we could instead be mapping it to pitches and tones and rhythms. And in some settings, this is already done, particularly in medical settings where people need to use their eyes to look at other things but want to be taking in data. So, you hear lots of beeps and buzzers in hospital rooms. This little child here is listening to Morse code. Another example of sonification is in stethoscopes, where either lungs or the heartbeat are sonified. So there are some situations where we do think of it naturally, but I think we can do a lot more with it. So the reason to sonify or consider sonifying data, there's lots of reasons. I started working with it because I taught an undergraduate class on global warming and saw that a lot of students were getting kind of inured to the many figures that were conveying data that we were talking about, and sensed that there's a lot more we could do to, particularly to portray the affective content of much of the science that we're sharing. So, right, so sounds, as I think the whole theme of this conference is about relating to science in emotional ways and in personal ways and in creative ways. So data sonification is another way of doing that. In particular, especially with climate data, it can improve the communication of urgency or risk. That, of course, depends on the data set, and as the sonifier, you have to make the choice of whether you should communicate urgency and risk with that. It can promote access to science for the visually impaired, and for those who aren't visually impaired, it can just also help to reduce visual overload and fatigue. And then also, I think this is most fun, is it invokes musical and emotional intelligence in science education. So I want to show an example of a sonification that I did. This was the first one I did as a collaboration with Dargan Frierson, who was one of the panelists yesterday. So this is a really famous data set, kind of a canonical, canonical data set, the Keeling curve, which shows atmospheric carbon dioxide measured at an observatory in Hawaii from 1958 to the present. And you can see there's both an annual cycle and then it's going up every year. And so I sonified this, and then we turned it into a music video, which I will play for you now. Let's see.
Cool.
Okay, so that was the sonification of this data set here. And obviously we made a lot of, took a lot of musical license in adding the rhythm and percussion and then turning it into a video. Have gotten a lot of good feedback, and I'll be doing some studies in undergraduate classes this year to sort of test how well this actually improves student engagement, concern with, or interest in the music. One of the things that came up in the last panel discussion, which was really interesting, is this idea of conveying the science through the structure of the song. And that, I think combining lyrics and songwriting with sonification would be a really fantastic way to do that, because that's exactly what you are doing when you sonify data, is you're conveying the message that's in that through the sounds itself. So how do we do this? I want to walk you through my process. This has been a pretty roundabout journey, and so I'm sure there's many ways of doing this, and I'll just show you kind of from a high-level view how I do it. I chose to sonify in Python because that was the language I was already using to do data analysis and I was most familiar with. So there's a library in Python called Picnon that I use to convert the data to a range of notes and that are output as a MIDI file, which is just a standard sound file encoding. And then import that into your favorite music processing software. So GarageBand is widely available and a lot of people use it. That's the first one that we did. And I want to show you what that looks like now. So I'm going to switch here to the notebook where I make that sonification. So this is a notebook for a sonification I'll show you at the end with C-ice extent. And what you're looking at here this is called a Jupyter notebook. It's just a way of writing Python code that's pretty easy to read and accessible. And I've linked this to my GitHub account so you can check it out on your own and download it and play with it if you want. I'll show the URL to that at the end. So when you use a Jupyter notebook, just each cell of text, you can execute each cell individually. And I'm not going to go through all the details, but the library that I use to make the music is called Picnon. It was created by a composer, Pedro Kroger, about 4 years ago. And I found it to be pretty easy to use. I'm an amateur musician, so it seemed fairly kind of intuitive and straightforward for me. And I've written a few sample scripts here, so if you want to use Picnon, you could run these and just sort of get a sense of how to write the notes. But I don't want to go too much into the detail of that right now. I want to scroll down to the actual sonification. So start with the data set. So this is the file that I used was downloaded from the National Snow and Ice Data Center, and I extracted the Northern Hemisphere sea ice from that, as well as just the September values. So these are monthly values. So I have an array of every month over the satellite era, which is 1979 to the present, as well as another array that's just the September values. And I look at them first to see, kind of start, imagining how I might choose to sonify them. So this is the data set here. And then you can see a couple important characteristics of the Arctic sea ice extent. So again, each point is a monthly value, and each new line is a new year. So as the lines get darker, you're going forward in time. So you can see the decline in Arctic sea ice, but the strongest signal in this record is the annual cycle. So if you can kind of imagine, if you just sonified that, the main thing you would hear is the annual cycle. Because the decline is small compared to that, the major growth and melts that happens just due to the seasons. If you look just at the September sea ice extent, which is the second figure here, you really see the notable decline. It's been over 40% of ice loss in the summertime, which is the time when there's the most human activity in the Arctic due to researchers and vessel traffic as well. So when I sonified this, I wanted to do both. I wanted to be able to hear this annual cycle because it creates kind of an interesting sense of rhythm and movement, but I also wanted to sonify this major decline in sea ice because that's sort of the important point, the important message. So I did that by doing two mappings. I mapped the every month, the data value of every month to a range of notes to pitch. But then I also set the volume for the whole year either higher or lower depending on how much ice there was in the summer. So the two mappings are mapping values to monthly values to pitch and volume. Sorry, the summer kind of minimum to the volume, loud or soft. And the code, again, I think you can look at this later if you want to understand it better, but there's just some simple functions here. So I wrote map to range, which takes in the data and spreads it to a range of pitches. You can convert it to whatever scale you want. So I have a function there for that. This function here, basically if there's nans or missing data, it converts those, it treats them as rests. And then these are like kind of the two main functions that, that sonify this data set. It, again, generates a MIDI file. And I want to show you just what this MIDI file sounds like. And then I'll show you the final product. I guess it's still a little bit in works, but after we've modified it a bit in GarageBand. So this is what just the raw MIDI file sounds like after doing this mapping. Okay, so that gets exported to, well, first of all, I should also say I'm showing you kind of the end product. This is an iterative process of trying out different ranges and different scales, and also trying out different ways of manipulating the data, whether to use monthly values or yearly averages or something else too. But that's the one that I finally settled on. And then I imported it into GarageBand and added more to it. So I'll just describe, I haven't made a music video out of this one yet, but I'll describe what you'll be hearing in this stylized product. So again, the pitch was mapped to the monthly values are mapped to pitch. And then in this soundtrack in particular, you'll really hear the changes in volume, which represent how much ice there was during the summer season that year. And then I added 2 acoustic field recordings to this as well to get a sense of place and to get a sense of the, that this is an ocean measurement. So there's a sound of a large cargo ship that's added that's heard 2 miles away from a hydrophone. And then I also added recordings of a bowhead whale near Disco Island that was recorded from a sauna buoy. This is again a microphone that's attached to a buoy. And to get the full effect, you may want to turn the volume up a little bit, and then once it starts, don't adjust the volume because you'll want the volume to be constant in order to hear it get louder or softer. Also, it's better to listen to this on headphones because there's a lot of low frequency sounds that a lot of computer speakers aren't able to reproduce. And again, this is about a minute, just over a minute. Okay. So as you can see, the adding in musical effects really changes the final product from the original MIDI file that comes out of the Python code, and adding in natural sound recordings can really help to kind of layer in a sense of place and where the data comes from, and also the kind of the ecosystem and the, you know, sort of the animals and humans that are affected by this change in sea ice. This brings me to my last slide, which is just links to more information. So this is my GitHub page if you want to look at the examples. The YouTube videos, The Deafening Rise of Carbon was the one that I played at the beginning of another called The Sound of Earth's Fever. And this is an incredibly helpful resource too, this sonification handbook, which is all online and has a lot of great chapters on techniques for sonification, as well as some of the sort of history and aesthetic choices too. So I would love to take questions or feedback or comments at this point. And I'm looking for the screen with comments, Q&A. Yeah, let me pull that up. JMG says, cool research, thank you. You know, one thing that I haven't done yet, but this conference is inspiring me to do is, you know, taking either a temperature data set or a sea ice data set and just using the yearly values. So it's a very short recording, and seeing if you can turn that into a melody that could become something that you could add verse to and lyrics, so that you're actually, you know, combining song with data sonification. It's definitely something that could be tried. So I'm able to see the Q&A box, and I lost the comment box, just like the button to pull it up. Yeah, the chat window. I can't find the chat window right now. All I see is the Q&A box. I had it earlier. Let's see. Oh, no. That's frustrating. Well, if there's Q&A from the chat box I can respond to, I'd be happy to do that, but I don't actually.
Judy, I typed a couple of questions. I can read them to you if you'd like.
Yes, please.
So, well, I think this is Walter, probably. Walter, yeah. Have you gotten many reactions on your carbon video?
Yeah, and like many other panelists too, it's kind of been a positive feedback loop of a lot of people being really interested in it, wanting to see more, asking about, you know, why did you do the sonification? Both interest on campus and in the kind of, you know, broader media ecosystem as well. And as I said, we're doing a study this year where I'll be surveying students before and after listening to this to kind of gauge whether or not it increases kind of longer term interest and engagement in climate change in particular. And so I don't have those quantitative studies, but the you know, just the anecdotal and kind of piecemeal qualitative feedback has been really positive.
And kind of related to that, and I don't mean this in any sort of judgmental way, but it's not clear to me. Clearly, you're working hard on this. Is this kind of the thrust of your thesis, or is it just a really cool side project to whatever else you're doing?
Yeah, it has become the thrust of my thesis. So I'm working in the, my master's work was in atmospheric sciences, and now I'm veering off into learning a lot more tools and techniques and gaining skill in sound composition through the digital arts program, and doing more work with this. So some of the projects that I'm doing involve more like making this more interactive and really testing, exploring how this can help kind of understand the timescales of climate change. One of the reasons I chose to start doing sonification is because almost all of the climate data that we work with is time series data. And so there's a real fundamental, limitation with using static images when you're talking about things that change in time. And when you listen to them, there is a sense that, there's movement and there is temporal change that is part of the medium of music itself that I think can be really powerful for understanding, things that are changing in time. So that's a little bit of a tangent off of your question, but yes, this is my primary research.
Yeah, fair enough. And then Walter Smith asks, maybe you can see this one, this is from the Q&A, are the notes in your sonifications chosen to be from a single musical key? They seem quite melodic.
Yes, that's a choice that you make, what scale to use. If you're choosing to use the Western musical scale, then, first of all, you're on a logarithmic scale. You've got 12 notes per octave. I chose to use a harmonic minor. I think it's a C minor for this sea ice sonification because I wanted something that was a little bit melancholic. So that's a choice that you make, to add the emotive content that you think is appropriate for the data set that conveys what you want to convey. So I see another question here. How do you find working with Jupyter? Do you use R? So I actually, I wrote that in Jupyter after writing it, just not using Jupyter as a standalone script. And I wanted to use the Jupyter notebook because it's a lot easier to share. And so I tend to write Jupyter notebooks when I want to share code with other people, and not necessarily for my own work, although many people do. And I think Jupyter is a really powerful environment for that. I've used it to help. I've also written some simple climate models in Jupyter to share with student groups for outreach and climate modeling, and it's really useful for that. And I don't use R, although you probably could, although I'm not sure that there are libraries for doing sonification in R.